And I also just want to let everybody know that Nurse Kurish, our school nurse, has joined us this morning. And so if you have any questions that are specific about health and safety, about the COVID numbers in Athens currently, about anything on that side of the decision making we're doing as we're getting ready to reopen school, please feel free to ask those and she'll help weigh in on those questions. Before I get started sort of talking about the events of the last week and what Clark Middle is doing to prepare, I do just want to acknowledge, sort of like I did a couple of months ago right up front, that there are still lots of answers I don't have. There's still lots of decisions that we're making. I'm more than happy to share with everybody our process for making those decisions and the criteria we're using to make those decisions and the priorities that we have as we make those decisions. But there are still quite a few decisions we haven't made yet. And so just to recap for anybody who maybe has been on vacation for the last week or so, Clark County did make the decision that we are returning to in-person instruction on November 9th for all students that are in grades pre-K through 8th grade, though there is the option for any student in any of those grades who would like to take it to remain virtual through January the 16th. And January the 16th is the start of the second semester. At this point, I haven't gotten a specific directive about whether online options will remain for the second semester, meaning January 16th and on. And so my assumption is that the district's goal is that right now in October, November, December, we're having our transitional period, that when we do come back for the second semester, January 16th, that they would be trying to bring all students back to in-person instruction. But that's still something that I think we'll have to monitor the numbers in our area and see what happens before that decision is made finally. The week prior to the reopening of schools, so the week of November 2nd through the 6th, the last part of that week, November 4th through the 6th, is going to be used as teacher planning time for us to prepare for the reentry of students. And so we will prepare asynchronous lessons for your children. So they will be engaged in academic work those days, but it will not be live with teachers because we'll be trying to get our school ready for students. We'll be hosting some orientation sessions. We'll be doing other things that require teachers to have a little bit more flexibility within their schedule. The district, when they sent their communication last Friday, did ask for parents to register their children for either in-person or virtual instruction. And so they sent directions for how to do that. I'll drop those directions in the chat again in just a minute for anybody who needs them. They have set a deadline of October the 18th, which is this Sunday, for parents to make their selections for virtual or in-person instruction. And then students who have not responded by October the 18th, which is this Sunday, will default to in-person instruction. I'll put my little caveat on that right now. If you watched the board meeting last Thursday, Mr. Gaskins made it very clear that parents would still have the opportunity to change their decision when they come to conferences, when they have phone or Zoom conferences on October the 30th. I'll say from the school perspective, I completely understand giving parents that flexibility to make that shift, but I'll also say, just so that everyone's aware, the scheduling required to make this shift for us is pretty significant. A middle school schedule is a little bit more like a high school schedule, in that we have lots of course offerings, lots of section offerings, and it's a pretty complex process to reschedule the entire school. And if we had, which is basically what we're doing to prepare for November the 9th. And Ms. Guffey, our registrar, is with us, so she can weigh in on what that process feels like too. But to try to do that, if a significant number of families change their decision on October 30th, we will find ourselves having a really hard time reacting to those changes by November the 9th. It really does. It takes a long time. Once the house of cards is built, you either have to knock the whole thing down and build it again, or not do anything to it. You can't just take a couple of pieces and shift them around. And so then, as we're thinking about the model of online instruction, because I know that's a lot of what people are wanting to know so they can make this decision for their children, we're currently considering 3 different models of online instruction, and a lot of which model we choose will depend on how many students choose to remain online versus how many choose to return to in-person. The model that we looked at first is a model where if we have a significant number of students choose to remain online, we would create an online teaching team at the school. So these would be teachers that would be responsible for nothing but online instruction. All of the other teachers would be responsible for nothing but in-person instruction. And those 2 groups of teachers wouldn't necessarily cross over unless there was a special need. The pros of that is that it allows our teachers to really focus on the strategies and pedagogy that are appropriate to in-person versus online instruction, because one of the things that we've found over the last 5 weeks as we've been working virtually is that there really are a completely separate set of strategies that really good teachers use online versus what they use in person. The downside of that is that it would require quite a bit of scheduling changes, and I would not be able to confirm that students would stay with the same teachers that they have right now, because again, we'd be creating online cohorts of teachers, and if your child currently has one of the teachers who's moving to online and you're choosing for them to stay in person, we'd have to change their teacher. The same would be true for in-person students. The second option that we've been looking at is a hybrid type model where all of our teachers teach a certain number of sections in person and then a certain number of sections online. And so if your student has, say, Ms. Edge for science, she would teach both in-person sections of that. So if you're choosing for them to come back in person, there's the chance that we would be able to keep your child with their current teacher, and she'd be teaching probably one section of online. And so if you chose for your child to stay online, we would probably be able to keep them with the teacher there. You notice I'm saying probably because, again, the scheduling of a 750 to 800 child middle school is pretty complex. And so I don't want to make any promises that we're going to be able to maintain schedules right now. The third model that we're thinking about using, and I'm really trying to stay away from this, this would be the easiest scheduling model, but I think the worst model for students, teachers, and I think parents would not be particularly happy with it either, is the model that we ask teachers to teach both in person and online simultaneously. Again, what we've learned from virtual instruction is that the strategies we use to engage kids online are very different from the strategies we use to engage kids in person, and I just don't see a way that a teacher could simultaneously do both of those things at the same time. As soon as I got the news that middle school was coming back in this first wave as opposed to a later wave, I contacted some of my colleagues in Jackson and in Winder Barrow and in Madison counties, specifically a couple of administrators there who are former CCSD administrators. And they said that they have attempted that model in some of their schools as well, and that nobody liked it, that teachers felt like it was more than they could handle, that students felt like they weren't really getting the attention that they needed, and parents felt like their kids were really only being taught every other day because a teacher would sort of in their mind flip this switch, and on Mondays they're focused on their in-person kids and on Tuesdays they're focused on their online kids, because it really just isn't possible to do both of those things simultaneously. The other thing that we are considering as we look at models, and this would roll into whichever instructional model we choose, is a combined model with some other schools. Clark Middle, as of this morning, does have about 150 kids who have chosen to remain online that have responded so far. That we still have like 400 kids who haven't responded at all. So that number is not really indicative of what we're going to be able to do. But so I know that we will have at least some level of online programs still at Clark Middle School. And so if Bernie Harris or Hillsman or Coyle, for example, have really small numbers of online students, we may include those in our programming as well. The final thing that we're considering as we think about our instructional program for returning to school is the idea of cohorting students. And so for those of you that have sixth graders that just came out of elementary schools are typically cohorted just by the way that they're set up. Kids go in, they've got a homeroom teacher that teaches them all four of their core classes. Really the only time they change from that one class is when they go to specials, but for the most part, they're in the same room with the same 18 to 25 kids all day long. Middle school is a big shift. Again, we're more like high school. And so when kids get here, they have that experience of changing classes every period. Unfortunately, changing classes every period is one of the ways that we might potentially spread disease. And it puts kids in contact with much larger groups of students than we would want. And so we are looking at different levels of cohorting. The level that would be the safest would be if we were to place students in cohorts of 18 to 20, the way that elementary schools do. Instead of them rotating classes every period, every time the bell rings, the teacher would rotate to a new classroom and those students would stay in the same place. The positive part of that is that it maintains a really small core group of students. And so if we did have an infection at Clark Middle School, it would just be those students in the cohort that would end up having to go into quarantine. It wouldn't be an entire team or an entire grade level. And then depending on the size of the cohorts, we can also start experimenting with classroom layouts so that we can even within a cohort class, cohort students at tables so that we've got 4 students sitting together 6 feet or more away from them, we've got another 4 students. And so if someone in that cohort, the larger classroom cohort got sick, it would just be the 4 students at their table that would be directly exposed to them. I'll say cohorting at that micro level of a single classroom, again, is really hard at a middle school, particularly when we start thinking about our connections classes and the fact that we offer multiple levels of different courses. So we offer accelerated, advanced, collaborative classes. So it makes cohorting at that level very difficult. The next level up, if we're not able to make that classroom level cohorting happen, would be to cohort at the team level. So again, at 6th grade, we've got kids placed on teams. So there's a social studies, science, math, and ELA teacher, and they all share the same 80 to about 110 students. And so the second level of cohorting would be to cohort within the team. That team would change classes every period or shift in some way, but they would change separately from the other 3 teams on the hallway. And so again, we're looking at mitigating risk, not eliminating risk. And so we would be keeping the chance of transmission of sickness just within the team and not within the whole grade level. I'll come back to that idea, and I really should have led with this. One of the things that the epidemiologist that I was able to work with when I was part of one of the district teams thinking about reopening was that there is no way for us to eliminate risk. We are a public institution that has hundreds of people coming in and out of our doors every day. There is no way for us to completely eliminate risk to students and staff. And so as we think about our planning, the way that I'm having to think about it is I've got 2 big buckets of things that I have to figure out how to manage. One is safety. And as safety goes up, choice and instructional efficacy goes down. And then I have to think about instruction and kids actually learning. And as I prioritize instruction and kids learning, safety goes down. Well, we can't let safety go down. And so we have to know that some of the things that we do instructionally are going to suffer. Some of the things that we do organizationally are going to suffer. Some of the opportunities and choices that kids and parents have are going to suffer as we prioritize safety and safety goes up. I hate having to say that, but as I've looked at the different options that we have, I feel like I just need to be open and honest and transparent about the situation that we're dealing with and let you know that we're doing our best to solve the problem, but solving the problem is going to require a little bit of sacrifice. The way that I'm describing it to people who are saying, why can't we just do everything that we've done before, but do it online and in person, is I say, well, grocery shopping has changed probably forever because of COVID-19. It's not quite as easy anymore. You've got to wear your mask. I know my grocery store still has arrows on the floor, so you have to go a particular way. I don't have the freedom to do everything I wanted to do before. The same is going to be true about school and really lots of areas of public life. It's going to look very different than it did before. The final thing that I'll say before I open it up for questions is just that. If you are planning to send your child back in person, I don't want anyone to think that it's going to look like school looked like in November of last year. The safety precautions we're going to have to put in place are going to make school look a little more sterile. We know that adolescents, just because of the time of life that they're in, they want to collaborate, they want to work together, they want to touch each other, they want to be together with each other, and we're going to have to put practices in place that prevent that. And so it's going to turn into a little bit of a tug of war with middle schoolers because they're going to default to their nature, and we're going to have to work hard to keep them safe, and that's going to require us to have some pretty strict rules. It's going to make schools feel a little bit sterile for a while. So that sort of gives you an idea of where I am in my thinking process. I've already talked about this with my admin and my leadership team. I'm really proud of the team of people that I have here at Clark Middle. We are creative problem solvers. And so as soon as I got my leadership team together and I said, hey guys, here's what the situation is, help me figure out how we solve it, they were ready. They came up with hundreds of different things that we need to address. Right now, we're in the process of prioritizing those things, assigning those out so that individuals can work on them and bring it back to our team so that ultimately we're able to make this transition in the time frame that we've got to make it. So I'll stop right there and I'll say we've got a smaller group today, so feel free just to unmute your mic if you've got questions that you'd like me to clarify. You're also welcome to put questions in the chat. While people are deciding what questions they have, I'll go ahead and say Ms. Millians has said that there was an Online Athens article about the rise in numbers in Clark County. I saw that this morning as well. Nurse Kurish, you're welcome to weigh in if you've looked at the data recently. The only thing that I'll say is that at the board meeting last Thursday, Dr. Thomas did say that while we are planning for a return on November 9th, if we did have a significant increase in cases, I think the terminology she used is we would back up and punt. I interpret that to mean that we would return to a fully online situation, though that still remains to be seen. So we are still monitoring the data. I'm not aware of any specific metrics at this point that have been put in place that would trigger us to go back to online or push back the start date. Nurse Kurish, do you have anything that you want to add to that?
What I can say is the nursing department doesn't know what we're gonna do concerning numbers. Like, we see the metrics and we are paying attention to that. So Amy is there. Amy Roark, the leader of nursing, is advising them what to do, and she is making her best efforts to look at the data points and give the best efforts. The nursing department is coming together to come up with guidelines to keep everybody as safe as possible. So we are working on that diligently, and we're all here. Questions, if you guys have them, we're here for you, and we are working on it. And Mr. Penley and I are working together to keep our building safe as well.
And so the original metrics that were guiding reopening were based around sort of a twofold metric. One was that our cases in Clark County dipped to the 150 to 175 per 100,000 level. When the decision last Thursday was made to return, I think Clark County was at 201, and we had had 2 or 3 weeks of steady dropping. And so it was reasonable that at that point we were saying, hey, here's the metric we set. We're getting close to it. The change that was made to the original reopening plan was originally we were going to come back in phases, with our youngest students coming back first, followed by our intermediate students, then followed by our middle and high. My interpretation of that problem solving process was that trying to bring back those groups back separately created a level of complexity that was hard to figure out how to staff. We have a lot of younger grade teachers who have students that are in intermediate and upper grades. And so I think as they were looking at what would happen if we just brought pre-K KM1 back, there was too high of a proportion of pre-K KM1 teachers that wouldn't be able to return to school because their children weren't returning to school, and that made that problem complex. And so I think ultimately that's why they looked at a solution that allowed all of us to come back simultaneously, but also allowed parents to have the choice of keeping their kids at home if they wanted to. The numbers this morning, as I looked at them, and I don't think they've been updated yet, I think they're from yesterday, we have risen, I want to say, into the 220s per 100,000. And our overall positivity rate, the second part of the metric guiding reopening was to get us to a 5% overall positivity rate or lower. We had dipped into the low 3s or the high 2s, I think, by last week, but I think we're back up in the high 3s or the low 4s as of this morning. And so we will again continue to monitor that data. Ms. Couch has asked, will masks be required? And I hate to ever say holistically something is true for every single child, because we're a school, we've got lots of kids with very special needs. But yes, at the middle school level, masks are going to be required. Any exceptions to mask wearing would be for medical conditions where a doctor says that a child is absolutely not capable of wearing a mask throughout the day. We do have some alternative face coverings. We've got some plexiglass face shields and some plastic face shields that we would be able to let teachers and or students use in the case of a student who is not able to wear a mask.
That was my next question, actually, on that. Would face shields be, and I'm not saying I'm for this, I'm actually not. Are face shields acceptable replacement for face masks? It's not recommended by the CDC, but I know that some schools do allow that. And so I was wondering if it was, would they allow that as an acceptable replacement? Because they're just not as safe, but I wondered if that would be accepted, because if they are accepted at many schools, it's commonplace.
I would prefer that our students wear masks. Again, yes, it will absolutely be a replacement for a student who has a condition that prevents them from wearing a mask, or for a student, because we know that we've got some students that don't necessarily have medical conditions, but might have sensory conditions that make a mask hard for them. And so
sure, I understand that too.
I think we could absolutely make that exception for students.
I guess I just meant, would it be an exception rather than a rule? I know many schools are fine with it as a rule, and I just wanted to know Clark County's take on that.
I think at Clark Middle, it would be an exception to the rule. Nurse Parrish, do you have any advice on that? We haven't actually thought about the difference between that's why it's good to have these, because it points out.
I've seen it happen.
So we're following CDC DPH guidelines, and they are sticking to masks. So I would say that it would need to be an exception over the rule.
And as for teachers as well?
Yes. Well,
okay, thank you.
Again, with teachers, it would need to be a case-by-case basis. But
sure, medical conditions and special cases, I totally understand. I just meant just because somebody wanted to.
Yeah, I think I'd rather make it an exception. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I've just seen schools where it's commonplace, it's the norm, it's the majority, and it doesn't follow the CDC guidelines. I just was wondering your take on that.
Yeah. One of the really interesting things is if you wear your mask in the evening or early in the morning when it's cold, and you get this real clear visual of how the mask works. And if you put a face shield on at the same time, and you know how you can see your breath in the cold, like the mask, you can almost see it push that way out the back of your mask, and it goes about that far away. I've put one of the shields on at my house in the cold and started breathing, and the cloud that sort of surrounds your face is about the same. So it is really clear that they're not quite as effective. The other reason that we would allow teachers to use masks is we do have students who have disabilities that fall into the deaf and hard of hearing category. And so
Sure.
those students need to be able to read lips. And so we do have some teachers that'll wear masks because of that reason.
Thank you.
We've also had lots of questions online, and I've had some individual questions about the ventilation in our building and the air conditioning service in our building. The plant services department sent out one of their engineers, I think it was either yesterday or the day before yesterday, to do an air quality study in our building because there was lots of community concern about Clark Middle and Cedar Shoals because we're the two oldest schools in the building. I can report very positively that we have very good air quality in the building in terms of level of ozone. Our air handlers all work perfectly for that. We actually have a better HVAC system than any other in the district for handling coronavirus because all of our classrooms have individual air conditioning systems that pull fresh air in directly from the outside. So none of our rooms share air across buildings. All that air comes in and is recirculated from the outside all the time. The system doesn't necessarily heat and cool our classrooms the way that they're supposed to, but they do serve the purpose of making sure that the air that's coming into the rooms is clean and isn't infected. The way that Mr. Bailey, who's one of our lead engineers, explained it to me, I was like, please tell me how I can put people's minds at ease as I'm talking to them about this is you can see the unit on the outside of every one of our classrooms. So I can look out my window right over here and I can see all the units for the B wing. He said I would have to go out to that unit and cough into it directly in order for anything to spread within that classroom. And since we don't have kids out in those courtyards during class, again, it's just bringing in fresh air. So we feel really good about it.
Thank you for saying that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
And that is, it's been a pretty significant concern because we do have an old building and we do have an old HVAC system. We just happen to luck out in that what it does do is really good for coronavirus, and we'll just continue to deal with the things that it doesn't do. Yeah, and Ms. Hinger's put in the chat, they're very much like a hotel unit. It brings in its own air. Ms. Page has asked, has there been discussion on how to enforce the mask mandate with students who refuse to comply, not due to a medical condition or other disability? Yeah, that's a challenge, and I've given it lots of thought, but I haven't gotten any clarification or guidance from the district. Again, sort of the choices that we're making around everything, whether it's scheduling or discipline or instructional options, means that we're deciding we're either prioritizing safety or we're prioritizing the other thing. I don't feel like we have a lot of choice but to prioritize safety, and so students are going to find themselves faced with stricter expectations than we've had before. Ultimately, and I hate saying it because we are a restorative school, we want all of our children that want to be here, we want them to be here with us, we want to welcome all of our kids back to our school community, but ultimately, if you're going to come and you're going to put our school community at risk, there's another option, and that option is online. And so if you can't come to school and participate in the behaviors that are going to keep our whole community safe, then you can't be part of our community. And so unfortunately, yes, we will have to hold students accountable for that. And it'll start with small things like conversations with me, conversations with a parent, but we're not going to be able to give 7, 8, 9 chances for a child who's refusing to do the thing they need to do to keep us safe.
Hey, Penley.
Yes, ma'am.
I don't want to be like a Pollyanna or anything, but our kids in the past, when it's been something about like taking care of one another and like being concerned about one another, have really stepped up. So I feel like I'm sure we're going to do some work on the front end with, advisement and conversations with kids about it being a community thing. I don't think it's going to be as bad as some people may expect it to be with kids not complying. I really feel like our kids are going to take care of one another. So.
And I agree and would second that. Like we do have a pretty tight school community. We have our conflict, we deal with our conflict, but overarchingly, adolescents are really keyed into fairness and justice. And right now, safety is a fairness and justice issue, and they want to be safe and they don't want to be scared. They're going to be uncomfortable, and there are going to be times where they're going to get frustrated by that, and we're going to help work through that with them. But ultimately we're going to model the behaviors that we need, and we're going to hold kids accountable for it. Again, the nice thing for me as an administrator who has to deal, if this becomes a disciplinary issue, is usually I've got a pretty limited set of tools I can use with students disciplinarily. Parents have a lot more tools than I have, but I do have this extra tool of this online program now. And so I can say with good confidence that my teachers have worked hard to create meaningful, functional online learning for students. And so if you can't be in the building in a meaningful way, then I do have an option for you.
Mr. Penley, I know other counties have put, like, you make a 9-week commitment or a semester commitment. And I appreciate like the fact that if we all changed our minds, you would have to change schedules. Are you going to put in, or is the district going to put in like a final deadline? You have made your decision. And so if we chose online and it wasn't working, and November 15th, we were like, can we come back? Or is the answer going to be, look, you're online through January 16th?
The way that I understood the district's letter was that when the commitment's made, and right now it's sort of a two-step deadline. One is the 18th, but then the final deadline really would be October 30th at conferences. Once we've got past October 30th, they are asking people to stay in their choice until January the 16th. To sort of let everybody know what that looks like, because that includes our Thanksgiving break and our winter break, it's 5 weeks of instruction. So it's about the same amount of online instruction that they've had up to this point. So yeah, I think we are asking parents by October 30th at the very latest to have committed to one or the other. I usually say, I save this for the end in the other groups that I've talked to, but I'll go ahead and say it now because it seems appropriate. We've struggled with the same decision with our child. We're watching the numbers. We're thinking about the effects on his social emotional state, the effects on his ability to be in a group and not turn into a feral 7th grader. And the thing that we continue to ask ourselves, and that I would challenge you to ask yourself, is, has online learning worked for your kid? Right now, at the stage of planning that we're at, the online classes that your children are in, I feel pretty comfortable that the online option is going to look pretty similar to what it looks like right now. Like, I can predict that what you're seeing in that instruction will be what they will see come November the 9th. I can't say that about in-person instruction yet. I'm not completely sure what in-person instruction is going to look like. We're going to do good. We're going to make sure that we teach kids the standards, but it is going to look qualitatively different than it did a year ago. And I just can't tell you what it looks like yet. And so if you're looking for the thing that you know versus the thing that you don't know, the thing that we know right now is the online instruction.
I had a question about that directly relates. I was just typing it in because many schools have also chosen for the virtual option to be a default program, like Georgia or Florida Virtual School. And so you just answered that. Basically, they will not be defaulting to that. They will be utilizing teachers, and it will be engaging as it has been.
Yeah, so currently our online program is scheduled to be Clark Middle teachers teaching Clark Middle kids. The only shift to that at this point might be Clark Middle teachers also teaching kids from some other schools if they have smaller numbers. I do think it will be the same level of engagement that we've got right now. I'll put the one little caveat on that and just say, depending on the model we choose, we may be asking teachers to plan 3 classes for in-person and 1 class for online. And so when you just think about the time a teacher has to take to intentionally plan something, now they're intentionally planning 2 things, you may see a slight decrease in quality. But I think our teachers have gotten pretty fluid with the strategies that they're using. So I wouldn't expect it to be a significant drop in quality.
Sure, I know as good as any what it takes on the other side of the planning. But like I said, once it defaults to one of those programs, I see a lot of drop off that I have in other schools and other counties. And I was just curious about that. So thank you.
Yeah, and I would like to not use Edgenuity. The one place I'll say that I'm struggling right now is with some of our individual sections. So again, middle schools schedule much like high schools in that we have different levels of classes, we have different course options, we have our connections classes, and all of that choice makes the scheduling world complicated. And so we have an accelerated math cohort, and then we have a couple of connections classes that are one-off. We only offer a single section of it. I don't have any additional personnel, so I can't split those sections into 2 sections. And so right now I'm still problem solving and thinking about whether I'm going to ask those individual teachers to teach both online and in person simultaneously, which one of the teachers of the accelerated math cohort has said he feels real good about that. He's really dug into online instruction and feels good about it. And so he thinks he can do both, but I'm trying to avoid it. So I'm sorry, I totally lost my train of thought because I was thinking about the next question I was going to answer, and I can't remember if I answered that one completely. I hope that answered your question.
It did. I was just concerned about the defaulted virtual program, so I appreciate that.
Sorry. Ms. Weaver's asked what the start time is going to be and what the mornings are going to look like. I don't know the start time. I've been told that on Tuesday of next week, I will receive our scheduled times. A lot of that is dependent on the transportation department. They are having to reroute the elementary and the middle routes based on the students who A, are choosing to come back, and B, require transportation. That's why they've asked that transportation question on the survey. And they haven't been able to tell us yet whether they're going to have to run extended elementary routes, which would push the middle school start time back from what it traditionally is. So right now we're running a 9 a.m. to 3 or 3:30 p.m. day, depending on whether it's an advisement day. Our traditional schedule is an 8 a.m. to a 3:45 day. I'm assuming it's going to be somewhere in that range. I just don't know where it is exactly right now. The other change to our morning procedures are, one, we will not be doing breakfast in the cafeteria. We'll be doing a grab and go breakfast. So students will enter the building through one of our designated entrances. At each of those entrances, they'll be able to grab breakfast if they need it. They'll take it directly to their first class, which, depending on the cohort model we use, might be the class they stay in all day. The second change to our morning program is we have always just voluntarily opened up the doors sometime between 7:20 and 7:30 for parents who need to drop their kids off early. We've given kids an opportunity to socialize, to hang out, to be in the library, to play games, to play basketball in the gym. But we do that with a skeleton crew of monitoring. Really just about 3 of us come in early to provide that opportunity. And I don't have enough personnel to manage keeping kids socially distant. Any of you who've come into our building during that 7:30 to 8 o'clock time and looked at our front hallway have seen that it's just a mass of bodies. And so I would either have to have teachers come in half an hour early, which would mean I would need to let them go half an hour early, which I can't do because kids are in classes, to monitor kids, or I would have to get enough volunteers to cover that. And we traditionally have about 200 kids in the building early every day, and I just currently don't have a way to monitor and manage that. So those would be the 2 big shifts to our morning procedures. Did that answer your question, Ms. Weaver?
I have a question.
Go ahead.
So you had said that for the different models, that it was going to be based on the number of in-person versus online. Is there do you have a number that says it'll be number 1 or number 2?
Yeah. And I'm trying to pull up my numbers to see how they've changed from yesterday, if I can get them. So just based on preliminary estimates, and know that is really just one piece of the puzzle that we have to fix. We would have the opportunity, we would be able to feasibly create an online team for every hallway. So a 6th grade online team, a 7th grade online team, and an 8th grade online team, if we had about 100 students at each grade level opt for online. And so basically what that means is right now 6th grade has team 1, team 2, and team 3. I would assign one of those teams to be our online cohort. The other 2 would teach in person. We would probably make the middle team the online so we could keep some social distance between the other 2 teams, and that would be it. If we had a slightly lower number, so let's say that about 60 per grade level, meaning about 180 to 200 across the building, I wouldn't be able to create a grade level online teaching team, but I would be able to create probably a 5 or 6 teacher online teaching team that would teach across grade levels. And so again, that would still be the model where all of our online students were taught by teachers who were teaching solely online. And then once we get lower than about 180, it gets harder to do a full online teaching team. That's when we would start looking at that model where teachers taught a certain number of in-person segments and then a certain number of online segments every day. The other consideration that we're thinking about as we choose the model, in addition to just the flat numbers of kids, is keeping kids' schedules consistent with the teachers they have right now. After I sent my letter on Sunday, one of the biggest pieces of feedback I got from parents was, oh my God, We feel like our teachers and our students have created these relationships. They are used to the classes they're in. We really want them, however possible, to stay with the groups that they're with and the teacher that we're with. And so we're listening to that feedback. That's impossible to do with that first model I talked about. And so if we want to listen to that feedback and be responsive to it, that means we're going to look a little more heavily at the second model where teachers are teaching some in person and some online, because that would allow us then to take, again, I'll use Ms. Edge as an example. If she's got 20 students across all of her classes that have chosen to stay online, we would shift them all into an online section for her, and then her other students would be shifted into her 3 in-person sections. And so the times in the day for that science class for students would shift, but they would get to stay with Ms. Edge and they would get to stay with the cohort of students they were with. Ms. Weaver, did you want to make a comment?
I do, if you don't mind.
Yeah, go ahead.
So, can everybody hear me okay? Okay, I just want you guys to know that right now I'm in my office in a surrounding county that has been back in school for 10 weeks and everything is going okay. I mean, we do still have some positive cases every once in a while. We do have kids go on quarantine every once in a while. We do have teachers go on quarantine every once in a while, but we're doing it. Teachers are so flexible and they will make this work. And that is one of the amazing things about educators. And I just kind of I was scared to death to come back to school. And every day I came home, I was scared I was going to bring it to my family or to my elderly parents, all of that. But I think that we all kind of have to come to the realization that nothing is ever going to be the same. And we have to figure out how to make this work so that we can continue on. We've just got to keep going. So I don't know if that's worth anything to anybody, but I just felt like I really needed to say it.
Thanks for that. And it's good to hear that someone who went in, and I know that you went into this year with a lot of trepidation. And so to hear that has eased some as other systems have made this transition is good to hear. That's a good segue for me then. And I'll come to the question about lunches in just a second that's in the chat. But in terms of class sizes and numbers, when we first were thinking of that we were coming back to school at our normal time back in July and August, I did some measuring in classrooms and I felt like I could get 12 kids in a classroom and keep real strict, like 6 feet plus social distance available in the building that we have. I could get about 15 students in a classroom and be right on that line of 6 feet away from each other and there not being a whole lot of wiggle room for error or for issue. And then I could get 17 to 20 in a classroom and it be distanced, but not the 6 feet that the CDC is recommending. Based on the numbers that we have right now, I'm looking at class sizes that are going to be right around 19 because I've got looks like 150 kids who are virtual and 157 who are face-to-face. If I assume that the ones who haven't responded do come back face-to-face, that would put our class sizes right between 18 and 20 right now. I'm hoping that goes down just a little bit more, but that's about where we would be. As far as lunch, I have not seen an infographic indicating lunch would be eaten in the classroom. The guidance that I've gotten so far is leaving almost all of those decisions up to the individual schools. I feel 2 different ways about that because on one hand, I'm like, yay, thanks for the autonomy. I really love to make my own decisions. But on the other hand, I'm like, wait a second, I have to make all of the decisions. You're not going to tell me anything. And so we were presented with 2 options. One was to do a drive-through lunch and then not drive-through, a walk-through lunch, and then students would eat in their classroom with their teachers. The other would be if we are using a cohort model to cohort the cafeteria. And so what that would mean is we would not keep students 6 feet away from each other in the cafeteria, but we would keep cohorts of students 6 feet away from each other. Basically, what that means operationally is I would take half of the cafeteria tables out of the cafeteria and I would space them out further. And so the class that is sitting together all day in their classroom would also sit together to eat, but they wouldn't sit within 6 feet of another class. The other big shift to lunch is that the challenge that 6th graders have when they get to middle school is that they shift from the cafeteria workers serving them to them having to serve themselves. They have to make their own tray, and that's super traumatizing for them for some reason. I don't know why. But we will not be engaging in that this year. The cafeteria workers will be serving all trays and all plates for all students. I think the only exception to that is students will be allowed to grab their own milk, but But other than that, all of the food service will be done by employees. And so we haven't decided yet. Again, and I hate saying this because I know y'all are like, well, we want these details so we can make our decision. And I'm like, I need you to make this decision so I can make these plans. And I know that it's not good for you and it's not good for me. And I apologize for that. But I can't really make those decisions and about lunch and things like that till I know how many kids will be back in the building formally. Will food still be available for students who are participating in the online? Yes, Clark Middle will continue to be a food distribution center. Because of the need for buses for actual student transportation, they are going to stop the meal delivery, but meals will be available at multiple schools. Right now, they're only available, I want to say, at 4 locations in the district, but they're going to expand that. And I want to say the vast majority of schools are pickup locations at this point. I think either 12 or 14 of our 20 schools are going to be meal pickup locations, and Clark Middle will be one of them. When the term switches in January, assuming a lot more students come back in person, how will that affect who their teachers are? I don't know that for certain yet, but I have asked. Again, a big part of the work that we're doing is scheduling work. And so I've worked with my scheduling team, and while we are definitely focused on the problem at hand, which is figuring out how to bring kids back, whoever chooses to come back, I've asked them to do that with an eye towards January. We schedule the school over the summer. We usually take about 2 months to do it. We start typically in May and June. And then this year I had to come back to my schedule team and I asked them to do it all over again in August as we were preparing for the online start in September. And I'm about to ask them to do it completely again as we get ready to come back in this November time. And so I've told them to try to think towards January and think towards solutions that would allow us just to seamlessly re-enter those students back into the school with the same teachers. Again, as we're thinking about the models, and that's why honestly, like, I don't really do these things so that I can communicate well. I do these things because they help me process all the information, because the more I have to talk about it, the more I feel like I understand what we're trying to do. And so as I've been talking about our program, the other thing is, of those instructional models that we're thinking about for online, that second model is the one that would allow us to bring students back a little more seamlessly without changing their courses. So as we're sort of moving through, I'm starting to narrow down, and that second model of teachers teaching a handful of in-person and then a handful of online courses is starting to rise as the best model. And so again, I don't have a formal answer, and I would say there will be students who have to change teachers or change classes when we come back. Our goal in planning is to minimize the number of times that would happen, because we know that the teacher-student relationship is one of the things that has a higher effect size on student achievement. I want to say it's in the 0.42 range, whereas many of the things that we would think have higher effect sizes on instruction are actually lower than that. I'm looking at that infographic that was shared, and yes, I have seen that one, and that was shared. I can't remember. That one's a little bit old, and I wonder if that may have changed. At this point, I'm under the impression that I get to decide at the school level where whether we're going to do classroom lunches or cafeteria lunches. And I think I'm leaning towards classroom lunches, but ultimately I'll let my leadership team and the numbers of students coming back help us make that decision. If we think we can do it safe in the cafeteria, we'll probably try. But Nurse Courish ultimately will weigh in. And if we put together a plan and she's like, no, that's a super spreader event waiting to happen, then we won't do it. It might have been just for elementary. I know that they, from what I've heard of their conversations, because they're already cohorted, it makes a lot of sense for them to stay in their classrooms for lunch, because it really tightens up that cohort model at the elementary level. Ms. Couch has asked, will there be a food pickup option outside of business hours? Not that I'm aware of, but we have given a lot of feedback to the school nutrition team around wanting to make sure that none of our kids who are online go hungry. And the fact that we're not doing deliveries sort of points to maybe needing a little more flexible pickup process. And so I'll pass that feedback on to our school nutrition team and see if they can come up with anything that would allow for something like a grab and go after the normal pickup hours.
I had a question about band, orchestra, I know that you had said that you don't know what it's going to look like, that you think that maybe online would be asynchronous, just because of the way that it has to be. My question is, if it isn't asynchronous for those kids online, when they come back in January, like, will the kids who are in school be doing more work on instruments, so that the kids, when they come back that have been online, will they be behind? Is that one that they can be doing the same stuff, or will it be different?
And you're right, I'm not sure yet. There are a number of factors that are playing into how we deal with our fine arts and our CTAE courses right now. I guess, first of all, our band and orchestra teachers, right as the week before the decision to come back was being made, they were trying to operationalize plans to distribute instruments to our students at home. And so they were ready to go ahead and start moving forward. They felt like they'd sort of worn out the music theory and the music appreciation to the point where they were like, our kids need an instrument, whatever we have to do, let's get them to them. And so my thought would be that they would continue to try to do that for our band students who remain at home. The hard part about figuring out connections is the timing. And so our connections teachers during in-person instruction run a pretty rigorous schedule. They teach 6 courses a day as opposed to the 5 that our core teachers teach. And so they have just a tiny minuscule amount of planning. And so they teach 2 courses at each grade level. And so in order for me to offer an online and an in-person version of each of those courses, I would need to have half of a grade level opt for online. And I know that's not going to happen. And so there are a couple of different ways we can solve that problem. We can either make all of connections for online learners asynchronous, which is one option. We can decrease options. And so instead of having all of our connections classes available to both in-person and online instructions, we could say, well, I'm going to offer a section of business ed, a section of visual art, and a section of FCS. And that's all the connections we're going to offer to our online students. And that would allow us to do it live and synchronously. At this point, I really need to check in with Mr. Rubenstein and Mr. Reevy and find out where they're leading. I think ultimately they want kids at home to have instruments too. So I think that's probably in the works if your child chooses to stay online. But yeah, when they come back in January, there probably will be a little bit of a skill gap between the 2 groups. I'll say pretty confidently that we allow students to join band as 7th graders, even if they weren't in band as 6th graders. And the same is true for orchestra. And so our teachers are pretty used to working with different levels of instrumental skill. And so I think they'll be able to manage that come January. Will string instruments still be shared? Only if we are able to come up with a process to sanitize them properly in between uses. And so I would say likely not so much. Especially given the viola and the violins and the fact that they live right here next to where your breath comes out. And then again, to sort of speak to all of that, even if your child returns in person, band and orchestra are going to look very different. I mean, in the past, if you've ever seen the band play, like the trumpet players are right behind the saxophone players, and they're basically just blowing their breath onto the back of the saxophone player's head. And so some of the guidance that we've gotten so far, and again, the school will ultimately be the one making the decisions about how we structure our band and orchestra programs, but we've been guided to do straight lines instead of the curved symphonic setup that a band usually uses. We've been encouraged to do sectional rehearsals on an alternating basis as opposed to a full rehearsal. And so that means trumpets might sit in a straight line and play forward while all the other ones are working on a different type of activity, or maybe just working on non-played fingering in the back of the room. And then the next day they might do the woodwind section. The next day they might do the percussion section. Ultimately, all of those classes that require, a lot of movement action is going to look different. The same is going to be true for things like FCS and Ag Science. So our FCS teacher has been really concerned about how she's going to do cooking labs, because that's where her heart is and her kids love it and she loves it. And basically she's only going to be able to have 1 child at each cooking station. So whereas before we could have 15 kids cooking during an FCS lesson, now we're going to be able to have 4 kids cooking. Miss Glennie also is going to have a little bit of restrictions on what she can do with Ag Science, but she spends a lot of time outside. And so I think she feels like she can solve most of her problems just by taking her kids out into the gardens. Again, while you're thinking of other questions, the thing I want to highlight is that it's going to look different until we figure out the things that work well. And as far as the overarching things like scheduling, entrance and exit procedures, those we're going to solidify way in advance. Some of the other things we're going to have to learn as we go through. And so some of these things regarding our connections classes, if we start out with, trying to do cooking labs with one student at a time and that just falls flat, then we'll stop and we'll try something else. And ultimately, that's how we're going to have to be with any decision. And again, we're going to, as we think about the different factors that we prioritize, as long as our numbers are high, and to me, and Nurse Curtis, you can weigh in, I think high to me is anything above 100 cases per 100,000 and anything above about a 3% positivity rate. As long as our cases in our community are high, we're going to prioritize safety. As those cases come down and get into the 75, 50 per $100,000 range, where we're not $100,000, 100,000 cases, 100,000 people range, we'll start relaxing some of those things and beginning to reintegrate some of what we would normally do for adolescents.
And we would definitely evaluate every step of the way. It wouldn't just be, we get to this number, because we have to look at our school individually as well.
The other thing just to be prepared for, and it's weird because it sort of feels like we ran a marathon and we finally got to the finish line. And then they're like, oh, and by the way, we want you to run another one. And you're right at the finish line, or you're right at the start line again. But the other thing we have to know that might be a possibility in the back of our heads is that the numbers could spike again after we start. They're already trending up. They're trending up at a really low slope. And so they're not going up heavily. But if all of a sudden they were to jump like that, we may be back in school till Thanksgiving and then right back out again. And so that's the thing I'm trying to have conversations with my kid about, because he's super excited to come back to school. He wants to come back to school. And I'm trying to moderate that and say, you're coming back to school, but it could only be for a couple of weeks before things have to go home again. And I don't want you to be disappointed if that happens. Oh, it looks like I missed a question. Assuming some teachers will teach only online and some only in person, is there a formal process for choosing who is teaching online, or will it be more or less volunteer based? It's going to be based on two factors. The first is teachers who are in high risk groups that have requested family medical leave. And so we're going to try to find options for them so that they don't have to take leave first. I'll say I've gathered my data at the school level. We only have 2 staff members applying to not return to teach in person. One of them is a paraprofessional and one of them is a teacher. And so I don't see that being a huge need for us to find places for those people to teach. But then the second would be making sure that we have the right credentials in the right places. And so while I have the flexibility, because Clark County is a charter school, to assign an English teacher to teach social studies if I really need to, and that might be necessary if we went with the model of having just an online team, having somebody cross over multiple subjects. Ultimately, I want to keep people teaching the thing that they know the best. And so that would be one of the considerations. And then I know I said 2, but a third consideration, I'm sorry, I just lost what my third consideration was. There's so much to think about right now. I hope y'all will forgive that my brain is having a hard time keeping it all in the right boxes. But in terms of choosing teachers, the third would be how good they are at it. Ultimately, I would ask my teachers to apply, and I would look at all of the factors, and I was as well look at whether a teacher was suited to online instruction. Some of our younger, newer teachers who part of their college experience was likely an online learning experience have just settled in, and they're like, this feels fine. I don't see a difference in this. I can absolutely make this shift, have a better capacity than maybe some teachers like me who don't have as much experience with that. And so we would look at capacity too.
I have one of Joanna's questions that I don't
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So she's asked, since 8th grade doesn't have the same team structure as 6th and 7th, how will the cohort structure work for them?
8th is going to be real hard. So because we offer so many high school courses to our 8th graders, and because we have such different pathways for students to select once they get there, we're unable to do a traditional team model. What we will do once our data comes in on Sunday is disaggregate that data by the number of students who are staying online at that grade level, and then we'll have to disaggregate it by course to see how it works out. I think we're going to be able to offer sections of all of our 8th grade classes, both online and in person, and we would then be able to, because if enough students who are on certain tracks stay online, we would be able to do a team model at the building level. One of the reasons we don't do a team model at the building level in high school is that when we look to schedule it, it starts to create real solid tracks. And one of the things that I love about middle school is that it puts kids in together with lots of different types of kids and lots of different types of abilities. And if we go with a full team model, because of the different tracks that are available at 8th grade, we typically have a high performing track, a middle performing track, and a low performing track. And that's not really good for any of those groups. So ultimately what we would try to do is move to that team model of cohort at the 8th grade level. And that will depend on how many kids in each track are staying online. I do think we'll be able to offer all of our options, both online and in person. The only one that I'm concerned about is the 8th grade algebra class. And then as long as we're talking about 8th grade and high school classes, I will say, if Connections moves to a fully asynchronous model, we would not be able to do that for our high school Spanish and French classes. We would have to offer an online synchronous session for those classes, just because it's for a Carnegie unit. It's a grade that goes on a child's transcript. I would not feel comfortable using that solely asynchronously. And I hope that was the same answer I gave to Joanna yesterday too. I think it was close enough. The other thing to just be upfront about is that things are changing pretty rapidly. And so sometimes I'll come on here and I'll say something, and then I'll go to my computer, and as I was talking, an email has come in saying that something's going to be different. And so just know my goal is to continue to communicate just as transparently as I can. And so as I get new information, I'm trying to share it. So in the same way that I was trying to move away from doing these chats weekly, I am going to come back to doing these weekly until we get to another level of settled. And I'll probably start doing 2 email updates a week as opposed to just a Sunday update every week.
Will you still offer them evening and morning for those with different types of schedules?
I'm going to try. It's so weird. Usually the morning is higher attended. And this time the afternoon one was. I think it was because it was sooner and people were desperate to get information, and then a lot of people watched it, the recording. So yes, my goal would be to try to continue that. I'll just say it's been a little bit harder to schedule these as we're moving back, because we're trying to do all of the prep work. And so I may not be able to give the exact same hours of 5:30 to 6:30 and 9 to 10, but I'll try to do both a morning and an afternoon, and we'll continue to record them and post them too.
That's fine, because with my regular schedule, I do like to be involved, but that would require evenings. So thank you.
Absolutely. What other questions or concerns or feedback do you want me to take to the district?
Mr. Penley, I apologize. I had to step away a few times. So if this was already asked or answered, what's the status of the hotspots and folks with or without internet coverage?
So for Clark Middle, we are pretty close to 100% internet for the families that expressed a need. Big thanks to our PTA and the Student Support Committee for helping raise funds and keep funds, and to Mimi Elliott Gower, who spent hours and hours on the phone with Charter and with families going back and forth. We have 3 families that had really significant balances, which there's something predatory about allowing someone to end up with an $800 cable bill. In my mind, I just don't know how we get to that point. And so there are 3 families that we're still negotiating with. We've made an offer to Charter to pay a lump sum for each of those families that doesn't actually get to their bill, but that at least pays off some of it in the hopes that they'll allow us to hook those kids up through January. And so our goal was to ensure that the choice to remain online was truly a choice for all of our students, that we didn't have any families feeling like they had to send their child back in person, even if they were not comfortable with it because of an internet issue. Tangentially, one of the things that we found out, and if you are involved in service groups or organizations or have a heart that's committed to this community, is we have found that we have a lot of families, not just in the Clark Middle community, but in the Athens community in general, who are really sort of hurting right now financially. And so as we've found out these students that we need to pay their cable and their internet bills, we've also found that we've had families that have power about to be cut off and water about to be cut off. And we've tried to support those families with whatever money we have as well. One of the hard things about the moratorium on evictions and shutting off power is that when those things expired, we've got a lot of families that have these huge bills that they just don't have a way to pay. And so in terms of the situation among our families, I predict that we'll see some things get worse before they get better. And so as a school, we'll be continuing to think of how we support families with food, with clothing, with all of the other basics that kids need to come to school. I'm not sure on the status of the hotspots themselves. I think as the district has turned their mind towards reopening, that's sort of been triaged or compartmentalized for them. The last I heard is they were still on order. Somewhere above 1,000 were being purchased. I haven't heard anything that says that that's changing. I also am aware that there are quite a few other organizations in town that are helping with internet. So if you are wanting to refer people anywhere that maybe are not in the Clark Middle community, I know the Athens Alliances Coalition is helping a lot of families with their internet. Athens Housing Authority is helping a lot of families with internet, and the Athens Downtown Development Authority is also helping. And then I believe the school social workers have also partnered with Habitat for Humanity, not necessarily for internet, but for helping to pay off overdue basic bills like power and water.
Mr. Penley, I have a question. This is a question I've asked you in leadership, but I want parents to hear it because I heard it from a parent. Can you talk to whether or not the schedule for online students will remain asynchronous on Fridays?
I don't know yet. I'm thinking no. And again, this is where if you go back and you watch my video from the same chat on Wednesday, I may have answered it differently because I am sort of evolving in what I'm thinking about it and how I'm thinking about it. Ultimately, a lot will, so the order of operations is I've got to have numbers of teachers and students returning. From there, I've got to select an instructional model. Once I've selected the instructional model, we can start looking at scheduling and all of those other things. Because if we select the second instructional model where teachers teach some online and some in person, our in-person schedule has to line up with our online schedule or that doesn't work. And right now our online schedule is 9 to 3:30. And so we would want to move our in-person schedule to align with that or move our online schedule to align with whatever the in-person one is. And because we're trying to do all of that alignment and we're starting to lean towards that second model, my gut says that, yeah, we might move Fridays to be synchronous for students because we want the online students to be able to have a qualitatively similar experience to our in-person students instructionally. And so if students are getting live instruction in the building on Fridays, we would want our online students to get live instruction as well. I'm sorry, y'all just had to put up with my thought process working through that because I really didn't have a decision. But look, that's how our decisions are made. So that's where I would go there. Usually our decisions are made, but not just me doing that, but having a whole room of people smarter than me doing it with us. That was a good question though. But yeah, I think we would start leaning towards in our online students having a live session on Friday. Ms. Vongkantong has asked, how will connections look in person? We did talk just a little bit about that. They are going to look qualitatively different. Some of our more active connections like band, orchestra, FCS, and ag are going to have some restrictions and limitations put on them. I think students in band and orchestra won't be playing instruments every day. They'll be playing in cohorts. So your student can expect on Monday to play and on Tuesday to do either fingering work or theory work or workbook work. And then in things like FCS, ag science, students will be able to participate in fewer labs that require collaboration. They'll be doing more independent work. And I can't really highlight that enough about the in-person that we know that adolescents need to move. We know that they need to collaborate. We know that they need to do a lot of things that we can't do in a safe way in our current situation. And so school is going to look a lot more like school in 1952 with desks in straight rows, with students working primarily independently, with teachers teaching from the front of the room as opposed to sitting with pods that in order for us to maintain safety, things are going to look a little more sterile. Uniforms. I love this question. No uniforms. And we had made that decision way back in July. I think I shared that with our school community that this was just a year with too much uncertainty, that I couldn't ask people to go and spend money on uniforms that they might never need. I couldn't ask people to go spend money that they might not have. And so we're going to suspend our uniform policy for this year. I'll let you in on a little secret. I'm not a big fan of uniforms. And so if this is an opportunity to sort of shift away from uniforms or open up the question about uniforms again for our school community, I may use it for that. That being said, if teachers and parents really love the uniforms and y'all want to keep them, we'll keep them. I'll just say, if we are able to come back without uniforms and we don't see a qualitative difference in how kids behave or how kids treat each other, we may decide to use this to move away from them.
Just a funny note on uniforms. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, please.
I'll just add a little comic relief here. The hardest part about uniforms was that I think when you have a boy in the young elementary and they get their holes in the knees every single time and they just don't hold up like jeans. This little comic relief there.
And my challenge, I had tall, skinny girls when they were in middle school, and it was impossible to find anything that actually fit their waist that was the right length. And so they would be like, Dad, I'm going to get dress coded over this. I was like, I'm the assistant principal. You're not going to get dress coded over this. Trying to think, are there any other big things that I should try to make sure that I share? Extracurriculars, a big question that I've had from some people is we will not be running an after-school program the way that it's been communicated to me. Ms. Hinger, if you've gotten any different information about that, please feel free to share. But we will.
Oh, go ahead. I was going to say right now we're in a holding pattern. We're waiting for the district to make a decision on it. They said initially there were no after school programs. The 21st Century program is a little different in the fact that they're having to communicate back and forth with the state about the funding on it, because the funding says that if we're in person, then the program should be in person, but we're not technically in person because we're like half not in person. So they're trying to make a decision about that. Of course, that only affects about 40 kids or so that are involved with that program. But I do wonder if, what about our clubs and things? Are those still going to continue to meet digitally? How's that going to work?
So clubs and organizations will continue to meet online to start with, just as we sort of dip our toe in the reentry water. But I think we'll probably start opening up, especially for some of our outdoor groups, to actually stay after school as we sort of assess the situation. But things like science and energy, math counts, FFA, all of those different clubs that Clark Scholars that students have started being a part of, will continue to offer those online until we're ready to transition them back to in-person. While you're thinking of other questions, I would like to maintain an online Clark Middle School presence. I think there's some kids that have just really loved it, and it has met their needs, either the need for less distraction in the school environment, either the need for autonomy and independence, the need for a little bit of flexibility. And some kids have just really thrived, some kids that I didn't expect to thrive. And so ultimately, as we come out of this situation, I would love for Clark Middle to create a proposal to the district that we maintain a 100-kid online presence, because it just offers us lots of flexibility. We have some students who middle school is a super anxious time for them and they struggle with mental health, and to have the option for them to be able to stay at home but still get the same quality of education is a good thing. The same is true for significant discipline issues. I have a pretty limited number of tools in my belt for consequences, but if I can tell a child, look, it's not working right now, you're coming to school and you're engaging in drama and conflict all of the time, we're going to try a week online just to see if we can get you focused back on school again. Like, it gives us options that are not just sending kids away and kicking them out. And I like having that as an option. And then it also, just for people who there's preference, I know I've talked to a couple of kids who are like, wait, so you mean when I'm finished with my work, I get to just leave class and I'm done and I don't have to do anything until my next class as long as I work real hard and get it done? And we're like, yeah, that's all that you need. And some kids really love that. And it motivates them to do the work that maybe they weren't doing when they were like, why am I going to do this? I can finish it in 10 minutes and then I still got to sit here for 40 more. So I would like to maintain an online presence for Clark Middle. So the question in the chat is when will students get schedules for November 9th through January 15th? I'm hesitant to even answer that. My scheduling team is meeting. They met yesterday. They're meeting again today. They're meeting weekly as we process our numbers to problem solve and figure out how they're going to do things. It will be very late. I think it'll probably be the 3 days, the November 4th, 5th, and 6th, right before the week. I don't think we're going to be able to get them a full week out like we did earlier. I think we're going to be right there on the last minute. Then again, Miss Lurch Batson leads our scheduling team. She's one of our assistant principals. Basically everything meaningful that's come out of our online transition has come through her or from her in some way. And so it's entirely possible that she'll rally the troops and that we'll have schedules well before we predicted, because sometimes she just works magic that way. Well, we are at 10:11, and so I've kept y'all listening to me for an hour. if anybody would like to hang out and ask individual questions for yourself or your child or your community, you're welcome to do that, but please feel free to head on out. I hope everybody has a great weekend, and I hope our numbers continue to remain low so that we can welcome kids back. Thanks, Nurse Courage, for joining us today.
You're welcome. I was happy to come.
All right. Thanks for always coming to these. Oh, I can't hear you. I'm sorry, you're muted.
I was just saying, I'm trying to leave, but I'm on an iPad and it keeps like, yeah. So anyway, I'm leaving. Bye.
Yeah, thanks for coming to all of these. It's nice to know I've got at least one friendly face.
Well, I like the information, and then I have people ask me questions, and it's nice if I can at least give them some answer that you have given. So,
All right. Well, thanks. Have a good day.
you too. We'll see you.